Hi, Sherry. How are you? Okay, we're at four. I'm seeing four, so maybe a couple more and then we'll get going. Although four, five, three. Should have gone at five. Hello, Ray and Tammy. Four. We're going to go ahead and go before it drops back down again. We are in Genesis chapter 31 this evening, beginning in verse 22. Before we start reading, just kind of by way of review, um, Jacob has decided to leave the employ and service of his uncle Laban and return back to his home. His wives, Rachel and Leah, who are Laban's daughters, are in favor of the departure, um, and they have left and crossed the Euphrates River on their way home. So they are camping out, the whole family there. It's good to see Darius and Ann, and Robin and Petey and Wally and Thelma all tuned in. So that's good to see. We got some families suffering right now, and we're glad that they're able to be with us and hopefully encourage one another. Hello, Mindy. Hope your procedure goes well soon. So, anyway, Genesis chapter 31, beginning in verse 22, and we'll read through verse 32. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, then he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream of the night and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad." Laban caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped in the hill country of Gilead. Then Laban said to Jacob, What have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me so that I might have sent you away with joy and with songs, with timbrel and with lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, "Be careful, do not to speak either good or bad to Jacob." Now you have indeed gone away because you long greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob replied to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Okay. Once again, we're seeing the family dysfunction on a clear display. We're seeing um, Jacob, out of fear, acting to escape Laban's presence rather than depart graciously and gratefully. It's a matter of uh, panic and fear that motivates this departure in a way that um, creates a lot of ambivalence, a lot of ambiguity, and it's a kind of so many things in history. When you look back at them, depends on which side of history you are and as to how you interpret them. And when you look at this departure, Laban can see deceit and fleeing and theft and deprivation of his own rights and his own interests. And Jacob can see security and fleeing as a result of fear and fear of losing what he has earned, at least what he thinks he has earned, and certainly loss of his spouses. And he acts to out of his own self-interest. And both sides are looking at this dispute out of their own self-interest. And sometimes we like to be pretty reductionist in our thinking and take there's only one way to look at things. There's a right way and a wrong way. And I think you could look at this case, and again, these two guys, Laban and Jacob, were both master defrauders. I mean, that's just what they're really good at. And that creates apprehension, and it creates it in both sides. Jacob is apprehensive, and so is Laban. And I think it's interesting that when God intervenes with Laban and speaks to him, that God doesn't really take a side in that sense. God doesn't tell Laban, yes, you have been wronged. He also doesn't tell Laban, you brought this on yourself. This is your punishment for having sinned against Jacob. He tells him, don't speak good or bad about it. This is my chosen. He's done what he's done, and don't praise him for it. Don't curse him for it. And while we sometimes are reluctant to embrace ambiguity, reluctant to embrace the possibility that people can see things, two right-thinking people can see something very differently from each other, I think God is a God big enough and strong enough to dwell with some ambiguity, to dwell with perhaps less than perfect conduct on both sides of an equation. And you see that, I think, in our political realms and our excuse me, our own storytelling and how things happened and how we view our history. People have to be either really good guys or really bad guys, and we don't allow for both. We have our cowboy either wears a white hat or a black hat, and that's the end of that. And the white hat guy is on the right side, and the black hat guy is an outlaw who deserves to be strung up from the next tree. But that's not the reality of human interaction. When we go in and we have disputes, usually there's a little bit of problem on both sides, and less than ideal conduct on both sides. And God can dwell with that. God can live with that. And he kind of, in this sense, is asking Laban to dwell with it. He doesn't vindicate Laban, nor does he condemn him. And he cautions him, warns him, watch what you do and say. I'm not saying that what Jacob did was right, but he's my anointed one. He's my called. And you need to be careful how you treat him. But overall, that's, to me, the most surprising aspect of it, is that God intervenes with Laban in a way that neither condemns or sanctions Laban's pursuit. And there's most certainly pursuit here. And we talked a little bit about this last week in this story of Jacob leaving Laban's midst and going out back home, that this is a foreshadowing of the Exodus, that there's a lot of similarities. The plundering, the fact that Jacob is taking a tremendous amount of Laban's wealth with him. That's the finest point of that would be Rachel stealing her father's household gods. There's this plundering that's going on, and then there's also the pursuit. When the Hebrews do leave, finally, Egyptian captivity, Pharaoh pursues. Laban is pursuing, and it ends up much better for Laban than it did Pharaoh, because Laban heeded the words of God, even though they may not have been exactly what he wanted to hear, and even though Laban has a reason to be angry, a point to be made. He heeds the words of God, and and backs off a little bit. So we have fleeing, we have pursuit, we have a vision, which happens to both happens to Laban here, and that it also kind of it doesn't just tell us about what's going forward. It looks back in Genesis chapter 20 when Abraham and Abimelech have their interaction. Abimelech is warned by God in a dream, in a vision, to not harm or sexually approach Sarah. So this idea of God reaching out to, approaching, and speaking to people who are in a conflict with God's chosen people, and who may have some standing there, may have some cause for being upset. That in that context, God, in a sense, doesn't necessarily make a determination who's right and who's wrong. God finds a way to bless his people, and hopefully at the same time not severely harm the person who is not happy with his people. Abimelech wasn't really harmed. There was some negotiation going on there when God and Pharaoh interact with each other over concern of Sarah being in his house. At that point, Pharaoh has already paid Abraham a large amount of wealth, and doesn't suffer because he did not act unrighteously. He did not act, the desire to bring Sarah into his house as one of his wives was probably intended to be a gracious act. And God vindicates, in a sense, to some extent, limitedly, both sides, and especially the side of his people. So we have this fleeing, this departure, the foreshadowing, the reminder of the other story. And there's a foreshadowing of a story that is one of the most difficult ones in the Bible. Hi, Kim. Glad hopefully you're back from Spokane and everything went well. It foreshadows something that's pretty far distant in the story of the Jewish people, and that is found in Judges 11, where you have one of the more interesting and challenging stories in the Bible, I think, which is the story of Jephthah, the judge, who makes a very rash vow, who has received assurances from God that he will be victorious in battle. The judges were kind of raised on an ad hoc basis by God to take care of a problem, usually a specific and limited problem. Jephthah is one such judge, and his story is, we'll look at this some other time in much more detail because it's a fascinating and difficult story. But he asks for more assurance, and in doing so, he offers a vow. He says, I will sacrifice to you, God, whatever comes out of my tent when I first get home. And when he gets home, the first thing out of his tent is his daughter, who is his only child. So that's a very difficult story, and there's a lot of, I think, ways to try to soften it, but I don't think it really needs to be softened. I think we just need to deal with it and absorb it. But this vow is very rash. It's not a wise vow based on what happened and leading up to it, and then what happens as a result of it. It's a very foolish vow. And likewise, Jacob makes this very foolish vow. Laban is not told to not interact with Jacob at all. He's told don't speak good or bad about him. He does offer some complaints, but then says, I have the power to harm you, but I'm not going to do that. Well, if he has the power to harm Jacob 3 days down the road, then he certainly had the power to harm Jacob while Jacob was sitting there in his own land, in Laban's land. So Laban has power and still some amount of wealth, and Jacob acts out of fear. And here Laban comes to confront him and is upset. And, he has lost. And how much of this is authentic disappointment and discouragement, or how much of this is crocodile tears, putting on, acting worse off than things really would have been, that if he had stayed, Laban thinks he could have probably vindicated himself a little bit more financially, gotten a better deal or something like that. Jacob has cut off negotiation and just left. He got what he wanted and he left. And Laban doesn't like that. He's coming up with the short end of the stick. But Laban does have some grievances here, and he presents them. And again, from what God has to say to Laban, it's not really clear that God is condemning Laban for his attitude. And he certainly doesn't dissuade or discourage Jacob from moving forward. So there's ambiguity, difficulty here. Both sides have some rights. Both sides have acted poorly historically with each other and maybe leading up to this whole thing. So, it's not all so clear cut. God's people are not always the most honest people in the world. They're not always without blame when there are disputes that arise. We'd like to think we're God's chosen people. We must be right. That's not the real point here. The point is not that Jacob is right to do what he is doing. The point is that Jacob is God's chosen vessel, and God will be with him through right and wrong, in a sense, at least up to a point. God remains with these patriarchs, and the point we see, the text we have, we don't ever really get to the point where God isn't with them anymore. But God is willing to accept and love and stay in covenant with these people, despite their flaws, despite their shortcomings, despite their less than desirable behavior. And Laban offers his grievances and tells Jacob what's on his heart. And Jacob defends himself and defends his actions to some point. And then Jacob makes what is really a very foolish vow, saying, the one who took anything, if you find your stuff amongst my stuff, you can have it. That's it. We're done talking. I'm not going to dispute that at all. But the person who stole your gods will die. And that's the point. That's really the foolish point of the discussion here. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live in verse 32. So Justice Jephthah in Judges chapter 11 makes this vow, which ends up forcing him to sacrifice his only child, his daughter, whom he loves very much. Here, Jacob's vow has put the wife he loves very much, the one who he'd put all that work into, all those years and everything, the one he did all that for, he has in one sentence put her life in jeopardy because she is the one who has stolen the gods of the house of Laban. So it's a very powerful moment in a sense. It has the potential to really change the course of Jewish history. It has a potential to really ruin Jacob's life. Jacob endures a lot of heartbreak, a lot of sorrow. Excuse me. We see Jacob's maneuvers and we kind of admire him perhaps for getting away with it. And yet, if you look at how his life unfolds, you have to wonder, did he really get away with it? I mean, this is a man who endures a lot of sadness. He has endured now 20 years without the company of his own family because of the deceit in stealing the blessing from Esau, from his father. So he's been now in the house of Laban. Yes, he gets the two wives. But if you think about his father, Isaac goes into Laban's company, Laban's present, and gets a wife, Laban's sister, Rebekah. But Isaac doesn't have to go himself. Abraham sends a servant. Isaac acts totally above board, and the servant is totally above board. Everything is clear and above board. And Rebekah is not a source of deprivation for Isaac. Isaac doesn't lose time with his father or friends or anything like that because of the acquisition of his wife, which Jacob does. Jacob gets two wives and two concubines but also loses a chance to be with his parents for quite some time, and then also significantly delays the reconciliation with Esau, which maybe that let things actually cool off and went better then. But Jacob pays a price, and that's something maybe we don't talk about enough when we look at the story of Jacob. Jacob is a trickster. Jacob is a con artist. He's a confidence man. But Jacob pays a price for all of that. Jacob misses Joseph for years. Jacob lives in fear of losing Benjamin for years. Jacob ends up dying in a foreign country. So Jacob is not beyond reproach or beyond punishment for, it depends on how you look at it, but you can see that God interacts with Jacob in a way that doesn't necessarily condone all of the things that he has done in this story. So we see that's I think the story is just very complex, and human interactions are very complex, and we don't like to deal with complexity. We don't like to deal with ambiguity. We want things to be clear cut, straightforward. Good guy, bad guy. Good guy kills bad guy. Good guy gets the girl. That's not usually how human interactions work. Both sides usually think they are good guys. And history judges, but history is usually written by the winners. So I was watching a video recently by, it was an interview of a young man who won the Medal of Honor not too long ago. He won it over in either Iraq or Pakistan or Afghanistan. I'm not sure which location. He fought in both. I'm not sure where his battle was that won him the Medal of Honor. And he was being interviewed, and he was talking about a previous encounter before he won the Medal of Honor. He was all by himself somewhere, and he got attacked by a single insurgent, I guess is the term that we would use for them. They may have a different term for themselves. But this single insurgent attacks him from behind, and they get locked, grappled in a fight, fist fight, close quarters, hand-to-hand combat, I guess is the term I'm looking for. And they fight and fight and fight, and he goes back and forth. And ultimately, the young man who would end up winning the Medal of Honor is able to kill, using a rock to the head of his enemy. He kills him. But as he looks back at that story and he talks about it, he says, I didn't hate that guy. You know, I was there fighting to protect my family. He was probably fighting me to protect his family. And, you know, that's the way human interactions are sometimes. I mean, it's not so much about good or bad or right or wrong, one side or the other. It's flawed circumstances, the result of flawed choices, the result of the brokenness of humanity that brings people together, sometimes in the context of conflict and violence. And that's kind of what we have here, and God doesn't necessarily take a side. In a sense, ultimately he does. He's with Jacob, but he doesn't condemn Laban for his anger. Verse 33, we'll move on now, verses 33 through 42. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maids, but he did not find them being those household gods that were stolen. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel saddle, and she sat on them. And Laban felt all through the tent, but did not find them. She said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household idols. Then Jacob became angry and contended with Laban, and Jacob said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Though you have felt through all of my goods, what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was torn of beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. You required it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was by day, the heat consumed me. Thus I was by day, the heat consumed me, and the night, the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I have served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. Okay. I mean, this looks even more to the ambiguity that is going on. Jacob comes out of the search. He thinks vindicated. See, you were bothering me for these household items that supposedly were stolen from you by my household, and you didn't find a thing. You went all through it, turned everything upside down, felt your way through everything. Looked in our underwear drawer, looked in our dirty laundry, looked in our private stashes everywhere. I gave you total free access to search everything, and you did, and you didn't come up with anything. God has vindicated me. God has said, you've treated me badly over these last 20 years. He complained about all the problems he endured in his relationship with Jacob. And, you know, that's still very human, isn't it? I mean, how things turn out, we still kind of feel like is the final judgment that is made on these matters. That if it turns out that one side, if the stolen items aren't found, then they weren't stolen by those people. If you prevail, then you were right all along. And yet, as readers of the story, we know that Laban had been victimized by his own daughter. Now, he had victimized them too, but the fact that the household idols did not turn up in Laban's search does not mean that the household of Jacob had not stolen those idols. We know that, right? We just read the story. And well, I kind of talked about this a little bit last week. But this is, again, foreshadowing, I think, of future events not that far removed in this case. It also kind of shows us the culture into which the law of Moses was written, and some of the issues around that, maybe why it was different than it was at this point. Rachel is having her time of the month. Her bill has appeared for the month. And under the law of Moses, when that happened for a woman, she would leave her household, go be in an area, a tent, and whatever, with other women who are experiencing the same thing, and be outside the home because of this state of uncleanness. It made a woman unclean. Again, we sometimes think unclean means bad, but it just means ceremonially compromised. You cannot be around polite society, I guess, even though you haven't really done anything wrong. When a woman comes into her time of the month, she hasn't done anything wrong. It's just a natural process, but it takes her out of the household for a while, for a few days anyway. And rather than that, Rachel is able to stay in her tent, stay in her domicile by herself. And whether or not she's actually in the manner of women is anyone's guess, I suppose. But she uses that accommodation that was given to women at the time to carry off successfully the theft, to complete the theft. She is unclean. She doesn't need to rise, stand up in front of her father. She doesn't need to be moving around. And as a result, she can sit right where she's at, and she's sitting on top of the idols. And I think it's very interesting, the phraseology here. Now, it's euphemistic to some extent. It conveys the situation without getting into anatomical or biological terms, which is quite common in the Old Testament, of course. People knew what they were talking about, and they didn't have to draw such a fine point on it, perhaps. But this is what she describes herself. She says, I'm in the manner of women. So as a result of that, I cannot accommodate all your searching. And don't be angry for that. And so that's kind of in the parameters of male-female interaction. That's playing the trump card there. That is dropping the nuclear weapon, basically. No man is going to get into that too deeply. No man is going to question that or challenge that, or that's something that's really hard to challenge a woman on, to call her a liar on. Especially your own daughter. So Laban goes along with that. In other words, Rachel lies about being, quote, in the manner of a woman. In Genesis 35, Rachel is doing something else that is particular to the attributes of womanhood. She's giving birth to Benjamin, and she dies in childbirth. She does not survive giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. And there's ways of looking at this, I guess. There's some way to say, well, that's just what happened. That's the story. But if you look at this kind of symbolically and you see the statements and kind of add them all up, you see Jacob saying, whoever stole this will not live. Whoever stole your items, if they're in my household, you find them. Whoever stole them will not live. Death penalty for whoever stole them. Rachel stole them. They were not found, they were not discovered because she said she was in the manner of a woman. Death penalty, manner of woman, plus equals death in childbirth. Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin, but to her second child. And, you can see that that's just what happened. Or you can see Jacob's vow, foolish and rash vow, actually being kept by God. That's one way of looking at it. And keeping it in accordance with her own words and visiting her own statement upon her. I'm in the manner of a woman. She dies doing something. I know this is a controversial statement in this day and age. She's doing something only women can do, which is give birth. And these stories, again, I wish, I probably have said this maybe too many times in this class. I wish in particular about the story of Genesis, the book of Genesis. I wish women were presented more favorably than they are. I believe that for the most part, almost exclusively, the story of women in Genesis is basically a statement that these are the daughters of Eve. These are the daughters of the woman who sinned first, and their weakness and their flaws are going to be on display. They will not really be credited with doing a lot of great things. If you think about their role in society at the time, they didn't really have the opportunity to do a lot of great things, did they? They didn't have the opportunity to go out and win great military battles. They couldn't be the director of national security or whatever the lady they confirmed today. They couldn't be vice president. They couldn't do a lot of the things that women are capable or and are empowered by our society to do today. They are reduced and seen almost exclusively as wives and mothers. And so their performance in those duties is the sum total of how we evaluate them. That's what we have to judge them on. And I guess also as daughter here. So it's unfortunate. I wish all the ladies were presented more nobly than they are. But they don't have much choice, much role in society other than as wife or mother. Exodus gives us a little better news. Exodus starts out with the story of Moses, his birth and everything, and there's 3 women that are presented very favorably. One's still probably a girl, but you have the midwives and then also Miriam, the sister of Moses, and they're all presented very favorably. Again, it's still in the context of childbirth and dealing with children, but it is beyond simply being a wife and mother. It's a sister and midwives. So, and we'll talk about that some other time, but it is, things get better, at least for a while in Exodus, and then, Miriam has her problems, and it's kind of back to the regular grind of women not being favored. There are women, certainly in the Old Testament, that are noteworthy and are very admirable characters, but they're kind of few and far between, unfortunately. But of course, the men aren't perfect either. But that's a regrettable. This thing with Rachel and her father, I think, is a very regrettable story. To steal the household idols, something that brings into the contact into the story of idolatry, false god worship, and things like that, and then also theft and deceit, even against your own father. Unfortunate, very unfortunate, and but Jacob feels vindicated by the results of the search. Jacob is victorious. Jacob is been vindicated by all of the things that are going on, but it's interesting. Jacob is very prosperous and yet still aware of his vulnerability. He still has a kind of a basic moral code of justice. I mean, the guy who defrauds his brother and deceives his parents is now wagging his finger. How dare you? How dare you insult my credibility? How dare you suggest that I would do anything deceitful or commit any act of thievery against you? Well, we've read your history here, Jacob. We know that it's nothing you're not capable of. But he didn't do it this time. So, and his wife did it, but she got away with it. So, but in closing, ultimately in this interaction, Jacob, the interaction is not over, but in this particular dispute, Jacob does give honor and glory to God, saying that he has been the one who has kept him safe and he has vindicated him. We know better, but that's how Jacob sees it. Let's wrap up the chapter. We got about 5 minutes. I think we can kind of close it up here. Verses 43 through 55. Then Laban replied to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these daughters or to their children, whom they have borne? So come, let us make a covenant between you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Now Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore it was named Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Laban said to Jacob, "Behold this heap, and behold the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass by this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and they called his kinsmen to the meal, and they ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Excuse me. Again, so Laban comes away thinking that he was wronged, that he has endured an injury, and what we think about that is probably different, but perhaps Laban was thinking of his rights in his own culture, that these daughters and these grandsons and all these flocks, they're still his. But so he feels like he's enduring a wrong. Jacob clearly does not feel like he's been done wrong, but they both have their side, their own way of looking at it. Ultimately, Laban has to just kind of eat it and say, okay, I'm going to endure this loss. I'm going to take this loss. He sees that his daughters and his grandchildren are going to be blessed by what Jacob has done, and he wants that blessing to be undiluted. He does not want Jacob taking other wives and having more children that would also be heirs to this estate. He wants the heirs of Jacob's estate to be the children born to his daughters and their maids, Jacob's concubines, who were also given to Jacob ultimately by Laban. So he wants this wealth concentrated with his descendants, even though he won't really get to be a benefactor of it at all. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul tells us that we need to do whatever we can to live in peace with everyone. And that means that sometimes we have to endure wrong. And just as these men may feel overly magnanimous about the wrongs they're willing to endure, maybe we are a little overly magnanimous about it. We have this idea we're being so gracious, and maybe we are, but probably we have done wrong to other people as well. And so if everybody asserts their entire rights to the fullest extent, we have a very contentious society. We're in court all the time. We're spending money all the time on lawyers and fees and everything. And we end up hurting ourselves. If we can sometimes just endure an insult, endure a harm, and just absorb it and move on from there, it's better for everybody concerned, including ourselves. But we have to value peace. If they valued family and all above all in this story, you work out ways to share the money equitably, not have it all go to Jacob. They didn't value family that highly. If you value peace, if peace is most important, then you don't get peace by getting your own way on everything. That's not how peace works. That's not how unity works. That's not how relationships work. Unity does not work unilaterally. Both sides have to at least feel like they're giving. Whether they are or not, they have to at least feel like they're giving. And they both have to feel like they're receiving. And Laban has found a way to make peace with the loss he has sustained. And he's wanting to make peace. Jacob is willing and wanting to make peace. We're going to be wronged and we're going to wrong people, but I think at the end of the day, most of us can look and say God has given us what we need to live. Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there, and that's all we're going to talk about Genesis chapter 31. There's a lot going on there. If you have some questions, you can comment in the video thread on Facebook, or email me or text me or something like that, and we'll talk about it some more if you want to. But anyway, let's have a prayer, and I will bid you good evening and hope to see you again soon, maybe in person before too long. So, Father, we are thankful for all the blessings that you have given us. We're thankful, Lord, that you have made a path for peace for all men and all women, that we can all live together peacefully, not without flaws on both sides, but through the grace and the unity and the blood and the universal need for Jesus Christ. Our humility leads us to the cross, and it should guide us as we go forward from the cross. And we pray, Lord, at this time that you bless the members of our congregation who are struggling in various ways, many with physical health, others emotional or spiritual needs, some with financial difficulties. We pray, Lord, that you bless us as a congregation, bless us as a nation as we move forward, bless the whole world as we deal with this struggling, difficult situation. And we ask for all of this in your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. Good evening. We'll see you later.